The wind moved gently through the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the quiet hum of a town that had already made up its mind about Clara Whitmore's future. At 19, Clara stood at the edge of the small wooden church, her hands trembling slightly as she held a simple bouquet of wildflowers. The dress she wore wasn't new, it had belonged to her mother years ago, carefully stitched and adjusted to fit her. It should have felt special. Instead, it felt heavy, like it carried the weight of a decision she never truly made. Inside, the pews were filled with familiar faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, people she had known all her life. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind gloved hands. Clara didn't need to hear their words to understand them. She's too young. She doesn't love him. But what choice does she have? That last thought echoed the loudest. Clara's family. Farm had been failing for years. Bad seasons, rising debts, and no real help in sight had pushed them to the edge. When Daniel Hayes made his offer marriage in exchange for financial stability, it wasn't spoken of as a proposal. It was spoken of as a solution, and Clara had said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bear watching her family lose everything. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Somewhere inside her chest was a quiet hope, fragile and almost invisible, that maybe things wouldn't be as bad as she imagined. But the stories about Daniel Hayes made that hope hard to hold on to. He was older. Much older, some said. A rancher who kept to himself on the far edge of town. People described him as distant, serious, and impossible to read. Some claimed he had once been different, warmer, even, but that something had changed him. No one ever said what. Clara, her father's voice came gently from beside her. She opened her eyes and looked at him. His expression was soft, but lined with guilt he didn't try to hide. "You don't have to," he began. Though they both knew that wasn't true anymore, Clara gave a small, reassuring smile, the kind meant more for him than for herself. "It's all right," she said quietly. And with that, the music began. Each step down the aisle felt slower than the last. The wooden floor creaked beneath her shoes, the sound impossibly loud in her ears. She kept her eyes forward, afraid that if she looked at the crowd, she might lose the courage to keep walking. Then she saw him. Daniel Hayes stood at the front of the church, tall and still, his expression calm but unreadable. He wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. His posture was steady, almost rigid, like a man who had learned to hold everything inside. Clara's heart tightened. This is it, she thought. When she finally reached his side, he glanced at her, not lingering, not cold, just careful. As if he understood more than he was saying. The ceremony passed in a blur of words she barely registered. Promises were spoken, vows exchanged. Clara's voice wavered only once, but she managed to finish. When it was over, the room filled with polite applause. The town had witnessed it. The decision was now permanent. Clara Whitmore was now Clara Hayes. The walk out of the church felt different, heavier, final. That evening, the sun dipped low over the horizon as Clara arrived at Daniel's rancho place that was now supposed to be her home. It was larger than she expected, but quiet. Too quiet. Inside, everything was neat, orderly, almost untouched. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place someone simply existed in. Clara stood near the doorway, unsure of where to go or what to do. Her thoughts raced ahead of her, filling the silence with worry. What happens now? What does he expect? Behind her, the door closed. Softly, she turned, her breath catching slightly as Daniel stepped inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, to her surprise, he kept his distance. "I imagine today wasn't easy for you," he said, his voice low and steady, not harsh. "Not demanding, just honest." Clara blinked, unsure how to respond. He continued, "There's no need to be afraid here." The words caught her off guard. He gestured lightly toward the hallway. "Your room is prepared. You can rest, we can talk, when you're ready." No expectations. No pressure. Just space. Clara stared at him, searching for something, anything that might reveal what he truly meant. But his expression remained calm, almost respectful in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," she managed to say. Her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel gave a small nod, then stepped back, allowing her to pass Dot as Clara walked down the hallway. Her heart still raced, but something had shifted. The fear was still there. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but for the first time that day, it wasn't as overwhelming. Dot behind her. The house remained quiet, and for reasons she couldn't yet explain, that silence no longer felt quite so frightening. Morning came gently over the ranch, carried in on soft golden light that slipped through the thin curtains of Clara's room. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, then it all returned. The wedding, the vows, the unfamiliar house, her marriage. Clara sat up slowly, the quilt falling into her lap as she looked around the room. It was simple, but thoughtfully. Arranged fresh linens, a small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, and a neatly folded shawl resting on a chair. None of it felt forced. It felt prepared. As if someone had taken care in making sure she would be comfortable. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. After dressing, Clara hesitated before stepping out into the hallway. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. There was a faint sound coming from the kitchen, something steady and rhythmic. She followed it. Daniel stood by the stove, his back turned, moving with calm precision as he prepared breakfast. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up slightly, and the early sunlight caught in his hair. He didn't look like the distant figure she had imagined standing at the altar the day before. He looked ordinary. Grounded. Clara paused in the doorway, unsure if she should announce herself. "You're awake," Daniel said without turning, his tone even. "I wasn't sure when you'd come out." She blinked in surprise. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," he replied simply. There was no tension in his voice, no irritation, just acknowledgement. He placed a plate on the table, eggs, fresh bread, and fruit, and stepped aside slightly, leaving space between them. "You should eat," he said. "It's a long day on a ranch, even if you're not working." Clara moved slowly, almost cautiously, and took a seat. She half expected him to sit across from her and watch, or begin explaining expectations, what she should do, how she should behave. But he didn't. Instead, he poured himself a cup of coffee and remained standing by the counter, giving her distance. That small detail didn't go unnoticed. "Thank you," she said quietly, picking up her fork. He gave a brief nod, nothing more. They ate in near silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable in the way Clara expected. It wasn't heavy or tense, it was simply quiet. Still, questions filled her mind. Why isn't he saying anything? Does he not care? Or is this something else entirely? After a few moments, Daniel spoke again. "There's no schedule you need to follow today," he said. "You can take time to settle in. The house, the land, it's yours to move through as you please." Clara looked up at him, surprised. "Mine?" she repeated. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away again, as if careful not to make her uncomfortable. "Ours," he corrected, "but you shouldn't feel like a guest here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Clara lowered her eyes to her plate, unsure how to respond. She had prepared herself for rules, for limitations, maybe even for cold indifference, but not this, not freedom. Later that morning, Clara stepped outside, drawn by curiosity. The ranch stretched farther than she had imagined. Open land, grazing horses, and a wide sky that seemed to go on forever. It was peaceful in a way she hadn't expected. She wandered slowly, taking it all in. In the distance, she spotted Daniel speaking with one of the ranch hands. His posture was the same, calm, steady, but there was something different in the way he interacted. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was measured and respectful. The worker nodded, clearly at ease. Clara frowned slightly. This didn't match the version of Daniel Hayes she had heard about. As she turned back toward the house, she noticed something near the porch, a small wooden crate. Inside, neatly arranged, were books. Her breath caught. She knelt beside it, gently lifting one. The cover was worn but familiar, a novel she had once borrowed years ago from a traveling library. "How did—" she murmured softly. "They belong to my sister." Clara looked up quickly. Daniel stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable but not closed. "I thought you might like them," he added. You mentioned reading once. To your father. Clara stared at him, caught off guard by the detail. You? Remembered that? She asked. He shrugged lightly. It seemed important to you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara looked back down at the books, her fingers tracing the edges. Something inside her shifted again, something small, but undeniable. This man, this quiet, distant man, had been listening all along. Thank you, she said, more firmly this time. Daniel nodded once, then stepped back, giving her space. Again, as he walked away, Clara watched him, her thoughts no longer as guarded as before. She still didn't understand him. She still didn't understand this marriage, but one thing was becoming clear. Daniel Hayes was not the man she had feared, and somehow that made everything feel even more uncertain, and just a little bit hopeful. The ranch had begun to feel familiar. Not entirely like home, not yet, but no longer foreign either. Clara had learned the rhythm of the mornings, the stillness of the afternoons, and the quiet way evenings settled over the land like a soft blanket. There was comfort in routine, but not everything on the ranch followed that gentle sense of openness. There was one place that didn't. Clara first noticed it on her second evening, their barn set slightly apart from the others, farther down the property where the grass grew a little wilder. It wasn't falling apart, nor was it unused. In fact, it looked well maintained, but it was always closed, always locked. At first, she thought little of it. A ranch had its private spaces, its storage areas, its workrooms. It made sense that not every door needed to be open. But over time, the small details began to stand out. Daniel passed by the barn often, but never lingered. He checked the lock once each morning, his movements quiet and deliberate. No one else went near it, not the workers, not the animals. It wasn't forbidden, it was simply untouched, and that made it harder to ignore. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and warm above the fields, Clara found herself walking in that direction without fully deciding to. Her steps were slow, thoughtful. It's just a barn, she told herself. But curiosity has a way of growing louder the more you try to quiet it. When she reached it, she paused. Up close, the structure seemed even more deliberate. The wood was freshly treated, the hinges polished, the lock sturdy but not excessive. There was no sign of neglect-only intention. Clara reached out, brushing, her fingers lightly against the surface of the door. It was warm from the sun. What are you hiding? She murmured softly, almost to herself. Her imagination, despite everything, began to wander. Was it something from his past? Something painful? Something he didn't want anyone to see? The town's whispers drifted back into her mind. She doesn't know yet. Clara stepped back, folding her arms lightly as if grounding herself. No, she said under her breath. This isn't that kind of place. Nothing Daniel had done so far suggested darkness or cruelty. If anything, it was the opposite. Quiet kindness, careful distance, thoughtfulness in the smallest details. And yet, why keep this one place closed off? That evening, the question followed her all the way back to the house. Daniel was seated at the table when she entered, a ledger open in front of him. He looked up briefly, acknowledging her presence with a small nod before returning to his work. Clara set down the basket. She had been carrying, then hesitated. She could ignore it. She could wait, like everyone seemed to suggest. But something inside her, the same quiet strength that had carried her down the aisle, urged her to ask. Daniel, she said. He looked up again, this time giving her his full attention. Yes? Clara took a breath. There's a barn. She began carefully, on the far side of the property. A flicker of recognition passed through his expression, not surprise, but awareness. Yes, he said, it's always locked. Another pause. Yes. Clara stepped a little closer, her hands loosely clasped. Why? The question hung gently in the air, not accusing, not fearful. Just honest. Daniel closed the ledger. Slowly, his fingers resting on its cover for a moment before he spoke. It's not something I've kept from you out of mistrust, he said. Clara watched him closely. Then why not tell me? She asked. He leaned back slightly in his chair, considering his words. Because it's not just mine to explain, he said finally. That answer caught her off guard. Not just yours? She repeated. He shook his head once. No, silence followed, but it wasn't empty, it was thoughtful, measured. Clara felt her curiosity sharpen, but she also sensed something else. This wasn't a secret built on fear. It wasn't something dark or dangerous. It felt personal. Important. When will you tell me? She asked softly. Daniel met her gaze, steady and calm. When it's time for you to see it, he said. Clara studied his face, searching. For hesitation, for doubt, but there was none, just certainty. And when is that? She pressed gently. For a moment, the corner of his expression softened, almost like the beginning of a smile. Soon, he said. That night, Clara lay awake longer than usual, staring up at the ceiling as moonlight filtered faintly through the window. The locked barn no longer felt like something to fear. But it did feel like something significant, something waiting. She turned onto her side, pulling the quilt closer. Daniel's words echoed quietly in her mind. When it's time for you to see it. For the first time, Clara realized something important. This marriage, this place, this man. None of it was unfolding in the way she had expected, not with control, not with distance, but with patience. And somewhere, just beyond her understanding, was a truth he was preparing to share. The question wasn't whether she would discover it. It was whether she was ready for what it might change. The classroom did not remain empty for long. At first, Clara wasn't sure what to do with it. For 2 days after Daniel showed her the barn, she visited it alone in the mornings, stepping inside quietly as if afraid the space might disappear. If she moved too quickly, she would run her fingers along the desks, straighten the already perfect rows of books, and stand before the chalkboard without writing a single word. It felt real, but it also felt overwhelming. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It was a responsibility, an opportunity she had never truly believed she would have. And opportunities, Clara knew, required courage. It was Daniel who spoke of it first. They won't come unless they know, he said one evening, setting down his cup. Clara looked up from her place near the window. Know what? That the door is open, he replied simply. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. The next morning, a small handwritten notice appeared at the general store in town. Lessons available for children. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. All are welcome. It was signed simply C. Hayes. Clara had hesitated before writing that name. But when she finally did, something about it felt steadier than she expected. The first day, no one came. Clara sat alone at one of the desks, her hands folded neatly, her eyes drifting toward the door each time the wind shifted outside. Hours passed slowly, the sunlight moving across the wooden floor in quiet patterns. By the afternoon, she let out a soft breath and smiled faintly to herself. Maybe tomorrow, she whispered. She wasn't discouraged, just patient. On the second day, one child arrived. A small boy, no older than 7, stood hesitantly at the entrance, his hat clutched tightly in his hands. Is this the school? He asked. Clara's heart lifted instantly. Yes, she said gently, stepping forward. It is. He shuffled inside, glancing around with wide, curious eyes. My ma said I could come, he added quickly. If it's all right? It's more than all right, Clara replied, offering him a warm smile. You can sit anywhere you like. He chose the desk closest to the door. By midday, a second child joined, then a third, not many, but enough. By the end of the week, the room was no longer quiet. Soft voices filled the air, chalk brushed against the board in careful strokes. Pages turned, pencils scratched, and the occasional laughter broke through when Clara turned a lesson into a small game. She found herself moving with a natural rhythm, guiding, encouraging, explaining. The uncertainty she once felt began to fade, replaced by something far more certain. She belonged here, not because someone had placed her there, but because she had chosen to stay. The town began to notice. At first, it was curiosity that drew people's attention. Parents lingered at a distance, watching through the open barn doors. Some whispered, some simply observed. But as days passed, something shifted. Children came home speaking of stories they had read, of numbers they had learned, of a teacher who was patient and kind, and slowly the whispers changed. "She's doing well. My boy actually wants to go back. She's got a gift for it." Clara heard none of these words directly, but she felt them. In the way more children began to arrive each morning. In the way parents started greeting her with small nods instead of quiet stares. In the way the classroom began to feel alive. Daniel never stood in the doorway. He never interrupted a lesson or drew attention to himself. But sometimes in the late afternoons, Clara would catch sight of him at a distance leaning lightly against a fence, watching quietly, not with expectation, not with pride, but with something softer, as if he was simply glad. One evening, after the last child had left and the sunlight had begun to fade, Clara sat alone at one of the desks, looking around the room. It had changed, or maybe she had. The space no longer felt like a gift waiting to be accepted. It felt like something she had built, day by day, with her own hands and heart. She traced her fingers along the edge of the desk, a small smile forming on her lips. "I didn't think I'd find this here," she said softly. "You found it yourself." Clara turned. Daniel stood at the entrance, his presence quiet as always. She shook her head gently. "You gave me the chance." He stepped inside, his boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. "A chance doesn't mean much unless someone takes it," he said. Clara studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Why did you really build this?" she asked. He paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he chose his words carefully. "Because I know what it's like," he said, "to lose something you thought your life would be." Clara's gaze softened. "And I didn't want that for you." The honesty in his voice settled deep within her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them felt different now, not distant, not uncertain, connected. Clara looked around the classroom once more, then back at him. "This place, it's more than I ever expected," she said. Daniel gave a small nod. "It was always meant to be yours," he replied. Clara held his gaze, her heart steady in a way it hadn't been before. Because now she understood something. She hadn't at the beginning. This life she had feared was slowly becoming a life she chose. Spring arrived quietly, as it always did on the prairie, soft rains, longer days, and the slow return of green across the open land. For Clara, it felt like more than just a change in season. It felt like a beginning. The classroom had grown beyond anything she had imagined. What once held a handful of hesitant children now welcomed nearly every family in town. The sound of learning laughter, questions, discovery filled the space from morning until afternoon. It was no longer just a room. It was a place where futures were taking shape, and somehow it had become the heart of the town. On a warm afternoon, Clara stood at the front of the classroom, watching as her students carefully practiced their writing. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, catching in the dust motes that danced softly in the air. "Take your time," she said gently, walking between the desks. "There's no need to rush. Every letter matters." A small girl near the front looked up. "Double quotes, Miss Clara," she said. "Is it true there's a gathering tonight?" Clara smiled faintly. "That's what I've heard." The entire room seemed to brighten at once. "Will you be there?" Another child asked. Clara hesitated just for a second. "Yes," she said. "I think I will." The gathering wasn't unusual. Willow Creek often found reasons to come together: harvests, holidays, simple celebrations of community. But this one felt different, though Clara couldn't quite explain why. As the sun began to set, she stood in her room, smoothing the fabric of her dress with careful hands. It was simple, like most things she owned, but it felt right. For the first time since her wedding day, she wasn't dressing out of obligation. She was choosing to be there. The town square glowed with warm lantern light by the time she arrived. Families gathered in small groups, voices overlapping in easy conversation. Music played softly somewhere in the background, carried gently by the evening air. And for the first time, no one whispered when she walked in. Instead, they greeted her. "Miss Hayes." "Clara, Good to see you. The shift was unmistakable. Clara moved through the crowd with quiet grace, her earlier nervousness fading with each passing moment. This place, these people, they no longer felt like strangers watching her life unfold. They felt like part of it. She spotted Daniel standing near the edge of the gathering, as he often did, present, but never at the center. For a moment she simply watched him. The man she had once feared now felt like the most steady, certain part of her world. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met, and this time he smiled. Not faintly, not briefly, but fully. Clara felt her breath catch. Then she walked toward him. "You came," he said as she approached. "I wanted to," she replied. That answer mattered. They stood together, side by side, watching the movement of the crowd. The music shifted into something lighter, and a few couples began to dance in the open space. Clara glanced at them, then back at him. "You don't usually join in," she said. "No," Daniel admitted. "Why not?" He considered that for a moment. "Never felt like I belonged in it," he said. Clara's expression softened. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, something steady and certain in his gaze. "Now, I'm not so sure." Before she could respond, a voice called out from the center of the square. "Daniel!" They both turned. Mrs. Alden stood near the lanterns, a knowing smile on her face. "You've been quiet long enough," she said. "Some of us would like to say a few things." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Daniel's posture shifted slightly, not with discomfort, but with hesitation. Clara touched his arm lightly. "It's all right," she said. After a moment, he nodded. He stepped forward slowly, the crowd parting just enough to give him space. Clara remained just behind, her presence steady and supportive. Daniel wasn't a man of many words. Everyone knew that, which made what happened next all the more meaningful. "I'm not used to speaking like this," he began, his voice calm but clear. "But there's something I should have said a long time ago." The square grew quiet. Daniel glanced briefly toward Clara, then back at the people before him. "This town has always known me as someone who kept to himself," he said. "And for a while, that was true." A few heads nodded. "But things change," he continued. "Not all at once, not loudly, but in ways that matter." His gaze found Clara again. "And sometimes it takes someone else to remind you what's worth building again." Clara felt her chest tighten, her breath catching softly. Daniel turned slightly, his voice steady. "The classroom, the ranch, none of it would mean what it does now without her." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. A gentle warmth spread through the crowd. Not applause at first, but something quieter, something deeper. Respect. Understanding. Then, slowly, the applause came, not loud or overwhelming, but sincere. Clara stepped forward then, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible months ago. She met his gaze, her voice soft but sure. "This life wasn't what I chose," she said, "not at the beginning." The crowd listened closely. "But what I found here," she continued, "that was..." She looked around the town, the children, the place that had once felt so uncertain, and then back at him. "And I would choose it again." The music began once more, soft and steady. This time, Daniel didn't step back. He held out his hand. Clara looked at it for just a moment, then placed hers in his. And under the glow of lantern light, surrounded by a town that had witnessed every step of their journey, they moved together, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly. Because in the end, the truth was simple. The marriage had been forced by circumstance, but everything that followed, the trust, the purpose, the love, that had been chosen, and that made all the difference.